Well, good evening, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to Flight Simulation Association. We're here live talking about what do you do when you've got your flight sim set up and you've just run out of things to do? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there's too much to do and you're trying to figure out how the heck do I navigate this giant world of flight simulation that I've just joined. So that's what we are all about this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Evan. I'm the co-founder of Flight Simulation Association. And if you're watching on our website or you're in our Discord, say hi, tell us where you're watching from. We will announce you and say hi to you on the stream here in just a second. Great to see people commenting, so thanks so much for the participation already. And a friendly reminder, if you like our content and you've been coming back for these webinars, please take the time, create a free account as a first officer. Better yet, become a captain. You're helping to support the association for $3 a month, and you get a whole pile of great benefits, some of which I am about to talk about. But first, let's talk about Flight Sim Expo. This was the news that we announced just a couple of days ago. Our schedule is out, travel details are out, and you can start booking right now. Hotel rates as low as $89 a night plus tax. I guarantee you those are going to sell out probably before the end of the year, if I'm honest. And I have no idea what we're going to get for a rate after that, but it is for sure going up. So now is a good time to make those bookings for the show. You can find all the information at flightsimexpo.com. I've been doing this pretty much all day. Lots of fun stuff. We just posted another discount on our website, this time with United. So if you're traveling intercontinental, especially international, you can save like 10% on United flights, which is actually pretty good when you're thinking about what an international flight costs. I was on the phone with NASA today, rental car companies, all kinds of people all over Houston trying to find some cool discounts and stuff for us to do. So all those details, of course, at flightsimexpo.com. And a big thanks to our friends at Mockingbird Air for that awesome livery that you can see in the background here. The other thing I want to talk about, and I just bring this up because it is such a cool deal, is that until September 30th, so for the next 2 days, there is this ridiculous deal on the Pimax virtual reality headsets. You can save literally 500 plus on the Pimax headset. Apparently, that's even below their cost. And a lot of people ask me with our discounts, like, do we get a commission? Do we get anything out of this? Absolutely not. We never get a commission. I literally get nothing out of selling you this except for the fact that maybe one of you on here really wants a VR headset, and here is your chance to do it. It's usually about $1,500 for this headset, and for us, they're doing it for $944. And it's not restricted to captains. This discount is open for all members, so all you need is a free account. And if you go to our website, flightsimiassociation.com/discounts/Pimax, you can download a code. You put that code into Amazon and you save yourself like 40-45% on these headsets. So I just point that out again. I get nothing out of it. If you buy it, if you don't, it affects me in zero way. But if you're looking for a VR headset, it is a pretty cool deal. And they've got their slightly lower end model as well, the Super 5K, discounted from 860 down to 539. That's open for the next 2 days, and the details, of course, on our website, flightsimiassociation.com. So what are we talking about today? What are we doing here with Mike? Well, actually, this webinar came to us from an FSA captain. Bill is his name. He and I met on one of the webinars we did with EAA back in the summer. And really, it's all about trying to help us navigate this world of flight simulation. I hear this quite a bit from people saying, look, I got my setup. I've done the one-on-one course that you guys have. I've kind of had a look at things and figured out what to do. I've done my little one flight in my 172, landed at my home airport. Now what? And so sometimes people are kind of going like, what do I do as the next step? Sometimes people are going, look, there's so much out there from VATSIM to POSCON, IVEO. There's all these individual multiplayer communities. I could do fighter jets. I could do gliders. What am I supposed to do next? And so we're here to try and cut through all of that clutter and work with an expert in flight simulation to help you get the most out of your experience, whether you're looking to do airliner flying, general aviation, airliners, military, or everything in between. And today's webinar is presented in association with Flight Sim Coach, one of our favorite partners, and they are not only offering stuff like this, free webinars for the community, but they also do one-on-one coaching. And so if you're an FSA captain, 1 hour of coaching is actually included in your membership. This thing costs $55 if you just buy it off their website. It's free, with the captain membership, which by the way is $3 a month. So the math on that makes a lot of sense. So if after today's session you want to spend some time directly with Mike one-on-one, you can do that. And better yet, of course, they don't just do stuff like this. They don't just do the flying. They don't just do the airliners. They do tech support as well. So if you're like, look, I've got these 6 add-ons and these 2 or 3 pieces of hardware, they don't play well together. How do I help get all that going? You can spend some time with a coach. They video with you, they screen share with you, and they help get all that stuff sorted out. So let me bring up Mike on the screen here, and it's a pleasure to have him with us. Mike is a former airline pilot, former Boeing engineer. He is now full-time the owner and the head coach at Flight Sim Coach. He's also a real-world flight instructor, and he's been a desktop simmer since 2000. So plenty of experience, not just in real-world flying and instructing and coaching, but also in flight sim. So Mike, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. We're looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone. So you have a simulator, and now what is our topic for today. And we'll start just by telling you a bit more about myself. So like Evan said, my name is Mike Catalfamo, founder of FlightSimCoach.com, and flight instructor, instrument flight instructor, and former airline pilot. Just a quick bit about our website. So basically, we connect pilots like you, simmers like you, to flight instructors who are located around the world that are specialized in various different topics. And we provide one-on-one remote instruction as you fly. So basically, you share your screen, and as you fly along, we're able to be there in the cockpit with you as if it were a real flight lesson. So that's our primary focus. The objective of our presentation tonight is just to give you some ideas on how you can best utilize your home flight simulator. So primarily we'll be focusing the presentation towards real-world pilots and flight students who have a flight simulator, and perhaps you've gotten stuck into some sort of rut, like Evan said. Maybe you always just fly around your home airport. Perhaps you've had a flight instructor that's told you, hey, you can't really use the sim for certain things. You can only use it for, maybe practicing your VOR work, or, maybe some procedural things and learning how to read the instruments, things like that. A lot of these notions have become a bit outdated, especially with the new capabilities and the high fidelity of simulation that exists in 2022. So I'll try to expand your horizons a bit and get you thinking about some other ways you can use your flight sim beyond what's typically discussed. And at the same time, to try to give you some semblance of structure to avoid overwhelm, because like Evan mentioned, the flight simulation world is very big. There are so many opportunities. You could spend, all day, every day on your simulator and still have plenty to see. So that'll be our goal for today, to give you the right balance between, finding some new ideas, but at the same time trying to give you some structure to work with. So just a quick overview of the different topics we'll go through. So we'll first begin by talking about some of the traditional ways that people talk about using flight simulations for pilot training and proficiency, which are great. But we'll also talk about how to go a bit deeper. So maybe if you're currently going through ground school, let's say, you're not maybe you're not even in the airplane yet, or you are and you're studying for your written exam, some ways you can try to apply that knowledge and the things that you're learning to get a much deeper understanding. Think of your sim as the ultimate visualization tool that we have available. We'll talk a bit about how to have more fun and variety in your simulation experience. And from there, we'll talk about some ways that you can work up a sweat in the sim, some intensive training exercises that you can do to really help push your skills to the next level if you're already a certified pilot and kind of the basics are old news to you and you'd like something that's going to really challenge you. From there, we'll talk a bit about the online community and support that exists. And finally, we'll talk about some ways that you can create an action plan for getting started. So that's our goal for today. We'll jump right into it. We've got a lot to cover. So let's start off by talking about what is a desktop simulator good for. And there's lots of opinions on this, and I think part of it is a bit generational. Some pilots that have used sims, way back in the day might have the impression that, the graphics are not very good and it's not going to really simulate your local area well, or that the air traffic control capabilities are not realistic. but some of those don't quite line up with what you can actually do in today's simulator. But first, we can agree on some things that no home desktop simulator will ever be good at. So one is motion or seat of the pants feeling. Now, I say this with a slight caveat. There are companies out there that are working or perhaps even have platforms for motion that you can bring into your home. But for all practical purposes, for most folks, this is not going to be a super feasible option. So we'll say that this is kind of a main limitation of desktop simulator use. You're not going to get seat of the pants feeling of uncoordinated flight and things of that nature. Control forces, this is the type of thing where you're never going to get it to feel exactly like a real airplane. However, depending on how big your budget is, you can get it to be quite good. But again, it's never going to be the exact same feel with all of the aerodynamics and buffeting and all that you're going to feel in the actual cockpit. So in the same line of thought, perfect flight dynamics, while some simulators such as X-Plane are quite focused on realistic aerodynamics and flight dynamics modeling, it's a topic that's so complex that no sim is ever going to perfectly model every little thing you're going to feel as you're approaching a stall or as you're in slow flight. So again, another area where we wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of effort on. Of course, unless you're doing something quite unusual, risk of injury and death is something that the desktop simulator does not bring to the table. And this kind of changes the mindset around simulation for some people, where you're not necessarily thinking about these real world human factors and stress that are involved in real life. So as much as possible, we try to make it model our real world procedures and thinking, but this is something we'll never come perfectly close to imagining or realizing in an actual cockpit. So now we'll talk about some things that are also not very well modeled, but can be addressed in a more practical manner. So when we talk about doing a pre-flight, practicing that and the perfect cockpit layout to gain muscle memory, typically that's something that is also lacking. However, there are hardware companies out there that you can look into to try to very closely model your actual physical hardware, your G1000, if you fly with that in your real aircraft, and other avionics. So it's something that it depends on how much you're willing to put into it. Now, when we talk about if you're a student pilot listening to this, one of the things that I typically emphasize to our instructors and remote coaching clients is that the simulator is not your best use of time is generally not for practicing things like landings and landing flares, where the feel of the airplane, so these control forces and flight dynamics, seat of the pants feeling, all of that becomes quite important. One of the other things is peripheral vision, but with the advent of VR, that's something that can be addressed quite well. So the peripheral vision and immersion aspect has become much better. Scenery being true to life, well, with the advent of Microsoft Flight Simulator and photorealistic scenery, this is also something that is can be addressed. So pretty much everything that doesn't fall into these categories, I would think of it as fair game, or even if they're these last three, something that can be made quite close to the real thing. So that leaves a lot that's on the table, because pretty much everything else, if it pertains to instrumentation or just visualization of maneuvers and thought processes, procedures, all of that can be done very well in a desktop simulator. And it doesn't take much. I mean, you can have a simulator quite simple, like I just have a single joystick here, and it allows me to practice 90% of what I need to. So just some other mindset things to be thinking of before we get into some of the details. One of our instructors put it, I think, a good way in saying that any pilot that really wants to become a master at their craft needs to use a personal flight simulator at home, even if it's something simple, like I mentioned, like a basic joystick. Think of it like a great musician. They're not just playing at concerts. They're spending hours and hours and hours at home with very deliberate practice that they've honed over the years to get good at their craft. And the same thing goes for pilots. Our concert is like going for a flight, and for most pilots, that's the practice they get, aside from if they're doing a flight review or going through training. And in that standpoint, is that really enough to become the best pilot you can? Probably not. So really the mastery is going to happen with use of your simulator at home to really push yourself on a consistent basis. unless you're a pilot that's maybe at an airline and you're already going through that, flying multiple times a day or a week. If you're a private pilot doing this for fun, especially, this is where your mastery is going to be taken to a next level. So that's a bit of discussion on where desktop simulation has its place. So we'll start with kind of the traditional, I'll call it, use of the desktop sim, which is kind of making the chair flying and debrief experience to taking it to the maximum. So let's talk a bit about pre-flight preparation. So let's say that you're a rated private pilot, maybe a little bit rusty, and you're trying to plan your next flight for $100 hamburger. Let's say you can use your sim to fly this exact flight, maybe get familiar with the pattern altitudes and entries. You can try out the different pattern entries. Maybe it's at an airport with some adjacent Class C or Class B airspace. All of that you can rehearse in your sim. So that's kind of a basic use of your simulator. Just kind of think of your sim as like another pre-flight planning tool, just like you would check your TFRs and NOTAMs. You can fire up your sim and, time permitting, run through as much of the flight as you can, or any of the complex portions of the flight, to make them go as smoothly as possible. So that's one aspect, is the rehearsal of the flights. And then let's say you're a student pilot, being able to refly your old flight lessons. Maybe yesterday you did a lesson on steep turns, and like we talked about, the desktop sim is not great for feeling those 1.3 G forces that you would have in the alert plane. However, you can still practice a lot of things like your scan patterns. Maybe your instructor told you, hey, you need to watch your airspeed a bit more, so you can do a bunch of deliberate practice runs where you're trying to do focus only on airspeed and looking outside at the horizon, and just really training your brain to be thinking about those things your instructor said. Or maybe your instructor told you, hey, Mike, you've been forgetting to turn on your taxi light or something like that before you start taxiing. Just over and over again, before you start your taxi, just turn on that light, and just do it 5 or 10 times to really drill in these things in a way you could never do in the real situation. So those are some ideas. Procedures wise, again, this is a typical area where sim use is advised and recommended. So we have checklists, being able to practice the procedures to start up the engine, or your pre-flight procedures. If you find that the default aircraft in whatever sim that you're using are not particularly well modeled, then just go in Google and take a search for whatever aircraft you're looking to fly. Maybe it's 172. Put add-on at the end of your search, and whatever sim, X-Plane, so Cessna 172 X-Plane add-on, and you'll likely find a whole list of companies and discussions on different ways that you can enhance the default aircraft in your simulator, and that way you can practice checklists more effectively. For emergencies, so one thing that you might consider doing is just every week, let's say, you can flip through your POH and pick a random emergency procedure, and then actually set up the trigger to practice that in your simulator in a way that's going to be much more effective than just sitting down reading your POH and not actually going through the motions of what things you need to do. From an IFR standpoint, of course, this is where the sim, it completely shines, being able to practice scan patterns, partial panel approaches, and then in line with that, being able to learn your avionics. There's all sorts of great add-ons like Reality XP that let you get a perfectly realistic GTN 650 or 750 in your sim. So all that is very possible. Navigation, understanding your VORs, really understanding reverse sensing, perhaps practicing a diversion without the use of GPS. All ideas you can be practicing in your home sim. And then this one we'll be touching on a few more times throughout the discussion, because it is really a huge benefit of using a desktop sim, which is the air traffic control aspect. And this is something where, if you haven't dug too deeply into the sim world, you might think that ATC and simulation is limited to whatever X-Plane or Microsoft has pre-programmed in the simulation. But that's not the case, luckily. There's online ATC services like VATSIM and Pilot Edge, where you can actually talk to humans that are air traffic controllers. And this is, for some of these organizations, either a hobby-based thing or a actual paid service. But they're humans on the other line that are trained, and they will provide services to you as you fly. They'll see your aircraft on their radar scope, And that's the ultimate level of immersion. Imagine having a VR headset on with actual air traffic control, where you tune the radios in the same way you would in the real aircraft, and you're actually talking. You have your checklist the same as you're using in the real airplane. You have for flight, and you can simulate your next flight to an extremely realistic level. So anyway, this is I'd say the first level of simulation use that would benefit most of you, which is just chair flying in these different aspects using a simulator, and of course debriefing. So if you're in training, to go back and anything that was a comment from your instructor, to replay it in your simulator to help reinforce all of the things that you covered. So from there, we'll get into our first demonstration we'll use Microsoft Flight Sim for this, which is an example emergency procedure: engine failure after takeoff. So many of you know that in a single engine airplane, this is really one of the main risk factors that we are exposed to, where with just one engine, if something goes wrong, especially in the first 1,000 feet after we take off, we really need to be on top of what are the options for where we can land, and have a well-rehearsed plan of what we're going to do. So for most people, most pilots, their instructor may have told them, okay, we're going to go straight ahead, let's say below whatever the number is, depends on the pilot and the airplane, but maybe it's 800 feet AGL or 1,000 feet AGL. We're going to land straight ahead, which is a great guideline. However, there's more to it. I mean, where exactly can we go that'll maximize our chances of a survivable outcome? And with a bit of homework, we can, I think, really increase our chances, and the sim brings that to the next level. So just for an example, we'll take a look at a flight. Let's say that we're going from, maybe we are flying from our home airport here in Tacoma and going over to Bremerton. They've got a great breakfast there over in Bremerton, so perhaps we're heading over there to do that, and then we're going to return, same day back to Tacoma. But maybe we've not ever flown to Tacoma, or to Bremerton, or we're just not familiar, and the takeoff there, we don't really know what all the different specific options if we had an engine failure would be. Maybe in Tacoma we know, hey, there's a field right off the end, or a road that doesn't have many power lines, and we kind of know that. But for an unfamiliar airport, I'd like to give you some ideas on how we can take that homework and thought process to the next level. So maybe where you could start is on Google Maps. So let's say we take a look at Bremerton. We'll just do one example here. Let's say we're departing runway 2, and off of runway 2, we can kind of look and see, do we notice any maybe large fields or landing options where if the engine failed after takeoff at a low altitude, it seems like there would be a clear-cut place to land. And in this particular case, there unfortunately isn't any great options. There aren't any great options. So this is an excellent example, I think, of where using the sim will help us to really think through, if this actually happened, what are we going to do? So when I looked at this, I saw, okay, we've got some golf course greens here, which if you read through accident reports, airplanes do land on golf courses every now and again, unfortunately, and the outcome can be successful. So this would be one potential option. There's also a road here. That's another potential option. There's maybe some clearings over here as well. Hopefully you guys can see the mouse there. Another potential option. But most pilots, if they get to this point, they'll just look at the satellite imagery and get familiar with it. But what we can do as flight simulation users is actually go ahead and rehearse this and see, what does it look like from a cockpit standpoint if the engine were to fail. In this case, we're going to do it at 600 AGL or 1000 MSL. And that'll give us a better idea, like, hey, I might think I can make it to one of these golf courses, but it probably isn't a great idea. Or maybe this road, we should be thinking about, are there power lines or anything like that? So that's the first demo we'll do. One thing I'd like to highlight, when we're talking about which simulator you should use, I know a lot of folks have that question. Should I be using X-Plane or Microsoft Flight Sim? I think the answer a lot of times depends on what you're trying to practice. So in this particular example, when we're talking about a engine failure after takeoff, that depends a lot on the specific terrain and scenery on the ground, then Microsoft Flight Sim out of the box is going to have that photorealistic satellite imagery-based scenery. So this would be an example of like a visual type procedure where Microsoft Flight Sim shines. So we'll start with that, just a quick demonstration. So we'll head over to Microsoft Flight Sim, and I've got the airplane set up already in the climb out out of Bremerton, and I believe we are at should be around 600 feet above ground level. It should reset here in a second. And what we'll do is we'll fail the engine, and let's say that I thought those golf courses would be a great option to head into as our emergency landing site. So we'll take a look and see what does that actually look like here. So we'll go ahead and unpause, and then once I do that, I'm going to fail the engine using a keyboard shortcut. You can also set up a general command trigger, but I'll do Control Shift and F1 to cut the mixture to idle, and we'll go from there. So here we go. We'll unpause, Control Shift F1, and the engine is there we go. Engine failed. So we'll take a second to react. And here we go. So I'm going to nose down, and we can see these golf courses off here to the side. Do these look like a great option right now? Probably not. So,
A little
you know,
sketchy.
in theory, yeah, they could be long enough, but with the orientation of these trees and other things we might not have fully considered when we first looked at the satellite imagery, we might want to think of a different plan if the engine were to fail at that point. So we'll pause here, and the beauty of this is you can save a position. Like I'll show you here, I'm going to load up a pre-saved position. So I'll hit load from this PC, and then I'm going to load this one that I saved using the same method. I can save or load from this same menu, and we can do it again, and we can do it as many times as we want, trying different options, trying different winds, trying different altitudes for the starting point. So you can do so many different variations very quickly. So
And
we'll
Mike, in
just
your
take,
coaching, like, because we're talking as we were doing our rehearsal about, what we could potentially do as a next step here, and maybe you're going to do a live session, but you've just about, or maybe, working on with the coach, like this is something that they could do, right? So you could actually be doing this with a screen share, and the coach could say like, okay, fail your engine now. So you don't even have that element like you have where you're going to kind of choose a time that's convenient like you would do in the actual plane, but you might have it that like, no, you just get it happening to you exactly as it would be in real life, and you sort of have to react with that element of surprise, right?
exactly. So that is one of the nice things about working with another person in the sim. That can be your trigger. If you don't have a remote coach, maybe it could be your spouse even, who's going to push the button at some unknown time to provide that level of randomness.
With me,
But
she's pushing the power button of my computer.
there you go. So yeah, but definitely having that instructor there who can create a smartly planned scenario is one of the things that we like to offer with our service. So anyway, we'll do one more, just taking a look at another variation here. So do Control Shift F1, engine failure, and this time we're going to say, okay, let's just try that road and see how this looks. We'll fit it on, try it on for size here. The road, I don't know if you can see, it's running right over here. And so
Yeah.
far, this is looking more comfortable. So I'm not going to take it all the way down, but you can get the idea how, what initially might have looked like a good option, to take it into those, big long golf courses, what it might have looked like on the satellite imagery, maybe isn't the best. So anyway, we've also got some clearings off to the right, which, I think that would also be not the best option compared to the road. So this is one example how you can use your sim to help you better understand what's going on. So I'm just going to load up the next scenario while so it's ready when we get to it. If there are any questions in the meantime, I'm happy to take any.
Yeah, I've got a couple that come through about various things, including flight sim coaches services and stuff like that. Just a friendly reminder for everybody, if you want to ask a question, if you're watching on our website, you can post it right in the FSA chat that's beside the screen, or if you're watching in Discord or actually on any other device, you can join our Discord and you can actually use your phone, your iPad, anything else to post questions and ask them as well. So we got one from Will, who's out in Rancho Mirage, California, wanting to know a little bit more about what you guys offer, specifically with respect to DCS. Would you be able to help out with DCS things like the F-18 and that simulator, which of course we know is a little bit more focused on the military than the civil side?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It's actually something I'm actively working on, and hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I will have an instructor who's able to help with DCS, because we have had some inquiries on that as well. Currently, we don't, but I think soon we will have that capability. So, good question.
Nice, perfect. And I got a few more that I'm saving for the end because they'll be a little bit longer answers as I see you're kind of setting up there. But again, folks, if you have questions, send them to the website, send them through Discord, send me an email if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll go from there.
Great. So we'll head into the next use case of your simulator, which I think is something that doesn't get talked about enough, which is using your sim as a ground school supplement. So we all know that there's online ground schools that are video based. We've got books that are published by the FAA or whatever's in your country that can take you from zero to knowing everything. But it's a different thing to have a simulator next to you as you're reading these books to actually visualize in an immersive way what it is you're reading about. So I'll just show you one example of how you might do this as you're flying, as you're studying along for your private in this case, let's say. So you're reading the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge about this section on runway illusions. So we get to this section, talks about we've got downsloping runways and upsloping runways and how that can cause you to think that the aircraft is either higher or lower than it actually is, which is a big deal, especially if there's obstacles or terrain on your approach path. So this is all great, but it's a bit boring to just read this stuff. So let's actually take a look in the sim and see if we can find a sloped runway and really understand what this means. So we'll do a demo again in Microsoft Flight Sim. I chose this because it's going to be more immersive for a scenery based or visual based maneuver. We'll head over to Catalina, which is a Kilo Alpha Victor X-ray, and on runway 22, there's a 1.7% upslope. So that should make it fairly obvious what we're talking about. So we can head over to this airport. I mean, in this case, you might be like, okay, Mike, how am I going to know where to go find this specific runway? You can do what I've done. I went on Google, I typed runways with large upslopes, and Catalina was one of the things that came up. So that's how you can kind of find these unique corner cases and airports locations that will demonstrate certain concepts quite nicely. So if you just take a look here, you can see that we are on the proper glide path according to the PAPI. But if you just take a look, it kind of looks like we're coming in high, doesn't it? And that's because of the visual illusion with this upsloping runway. So just doing this here, you could fly along and practice your landing flare and just take a look and see, yeah, this makes it look like I'm quite high, but on the 3-degree glide path, it's actually just an illusion. So this is another sample where you can use your sim in an unexpected way. So from there, let's talk about some other ways that your sim can really help you deeply understand your ground school material. So we talk a lot of times about angle, or you'll hear a lot about angle of attack being as one of the most important things for a pilot. How angle of attack is life. How a lot of loss of control accidents are due to stalls, which, as many of you know, are due to exceeding your critical angle of attack. But really, when we go into most general aviation aircraft, there is no angle of attack indicator. So wouldn't it be nice to really have a way to visualize the number that's associated with angle of attack, so we can have an idea of under what conditions is that number approaching a stall, and specifically how that number changes from a quantitative standpoint, not just conceptual. And that's one of the areas where using X-Plane in this case would excel. X-Plane has excellent aerodynamic modeling and a lot of tools that let you dive into some of these details, like aerodynamics and flight dynamics parameters, in a way that other simulators wouldn't be quite as well suited for. So what I'm going to do here, just to start with angle of attack, we'll load up a quick flight here, which is already in the air, and we'll just play around with some of the capabilities that X-Plane has to offer, so you can understand these concepts more in depth. What we're going to be looking at is an indicator, which will show up here in a moment in the upper left of the screen. And it's going to display our real-time readout of angle of attack. So while your airplane may not have this, the simulator certainly is capable of telling us the exact angle of attack, and we should make use of it. Have this up as much as you can, and maybe try to make yourself guess, like, what do I think my angle of attack is right now based on the conditions of my vertical speed and my pitch attitude, and then you can check what is it actually showing. And from there, if you do this many tens or hundreds of times, you'll develop a very deep understanding, intuitive understanding of the concept. So that's what we'll do as soon as the loading is finished here. Let's
Perfect.
see. Okay, here we are. So pause here for a moment. So the indication that I mentioned, we can get that up quite easily by going to the X-Plane settings. And then in the data output section, there's a whole list of different parameters you can output. Now, most of these are not going to be particularly useful for your education as a safe pilot, but this one I do think is. So we can select the angle of attack line and then press show in cockpit, and you'll see we have a little pop-up here in the upper left that displays the angle of attack numerically. So there you go. It's quite simple. I apologize. It's likely going to be a bit hard to read, but I'll try my best to read out the numbers so you can understand what's going on. So what we might do, let's say we've studied up on our aerodynamics section and we really want to gain a deep understanding of what's going on here, is let's say we're flying along at 60 knots. We heard somewhere that angle of attack is related to airspeed. So, we see, okay, at 60 knots, I can read right now my angle of attack is 6. That's where it says alpha there in the very left. So we have some correspondence there, 60 knots, about 6 degrees of angle of attack. And then if we were to slow down, I'll do my best to maintain level flight as I'm slowing down, you'll see the number go up. So we see 7, 8 degrees, 9 degrees. So already we can begin to understand, the relationship between, as we slow down, what does the angle of attack do? Which is great to start with. Now there's some other things that your instructor might have told you about, like how as we turn the airplane, as we go into a steeper bank angle, that has an effect on how close we are to stall. So in terms of our stall speed. So what we can do is, if we go back to a speed of about 60 knots. If you guys remember, we were at a angle of attack of roughly 6 degrees. Now, what I would suggest that you experiment with is, let's say we go into a bank angle at roughly this speed. This might be like what you're doing in a base to final in a 172, let's say. And I'm going to go into a fairly steep bank angle. And then let's just see what our angle of attack does. Are we any closer to a stall? And what we can see here is that even though our speed is roughly the same, our angle of attack right now is a couple degrees higher. So it went from 6 to about 8.5. And that should make the concept very clear that the airspeed indicator isn't the be-all, end-all of when you're going to stall. In this case, we are 2.5 degrees closer to our stall angle of attack just because of that bank angle. So that's another tool you can use to help your understanding. Another few quick things that I'd like to show you are we have a view option here that's forward with HUD. So if you go view and then internal and then forward with HUD, you can see here this heads up display. And if you really want to understand angle of attack, I would highly suggest opening this up and then look at these two things right here. You've got your pitch attitude and your flight path vector. So this tells you pitch, just like your attitude indicator, which, as many of you know, does not necessarily tell you if you're close to a stall or not. You can be stalled with the aircraft pitch down potentially. But if you compare the difference between this and your flight path vector, which basically tells you if you're climbing, descending, or level, the difference between the two gives you your angle of attack. And this is something you're never going to be able to or I shouldn't say never. There are companies out that make HUDs for 172s, but not easily see in your 172. But right now, I can compare those two things, the little circle and the pitch attitude, and we can see how the this is the 0 line for 0 pitch. This is 5 degrees of pitch attitude, and that's the same as our angle of attack, about 5 degrees. And that's just one example of how we can understand angle of attack. Another thing we might do is, maybe you're a more advanced pilot, you're reading about stability and how the center of gravity affects the stability of the airplane. So perhaps you go in your settings here and we can make our center of gravity way in the back of the airplane. And you read about how that's supposed to make things more unstable. And let's actually see what that looks like. So we'll apply changes. And we can see now that although I'm not trimmed for that new angle attack, we're bobbing all over the place, even from little control inputs. So you get a really intuitive understanding of what this stability thing is all about and how the center of gravity position affects that. Much better than reading the FAA material. No offense, FAA, but this is a good way to make it much more vivid. So that covers the first two. You can also do things with maybe short field operations. We have a deep dive course that you can do either solo on your own or with an instructor on our website, flightsimcoach.com, to really understand the way that density, altitude, and so forth affects your performance on short fields. We've got some airports selected that are make a nice, interesting, exciting example. So that's another idea for you. In terms of airspace, perhaps you pick a flight through some complicated airspace in this area here in SoCal, for example, and then at some point you say, okay, I'm going to set a timer on my phone for where I'm going to simulate a lost communications procedure and then actually put it into practice. What are you going to do? What altitude are you going to fly? What squawk code do you use, and so forth. So those are some ideas going beyond the books. We'll get into fun and variety next. So this is something that Evan and I talked about a bit that really we want to emphasize, which is you don't have to stay at your home airport or in your home airplane to get a lot of value out of your sim. If you're training, you can go to other places. Maybe there are places you find super interesting and cool. Maybe it's your favorite vacation destination or your dream airplane, and you can still practice fundamentals in those things. Just think of it like another slightly different version of what you'll actually be flying or training in, and it's just going to make you more adaptable as a pilot. So maybe you combine your training and proficiency with some sort of a virtual sim vacation to wherever it is that you find interesting in your favorite airplane. We had one remote coaching client who he just loves Key West, even though he lives in New Hampshire, and we would go down to Key West for all of the basic maneuvers and takeoffs and landings, and it just made it more exciting for him. So feel free to venture out. Also consider learning about new operations that maybe you've always thought about, but maybe it doesn't exist in your area or it's cost prohibitive. So maybe it's gliders or helicopters or even airliners. You can certainly simulate all those things in your simulator. On our instructor roster, we've got folks that have glider experience like Alan, Lee, Ehrman. He's flown all sorts of corporate aircraft. We've got a 787 pilot, helicopter pilots, and even though you might be a instrument rated pilot in a 172, by flying with someone who's an airline pilot, you're going to learn a really unique perspective that you can apply to your flying in a way that you would likely never be able to do otherwise. So it's a really cool resource to take advantage of. When we talked about at the beginning not feeling overwhelmed, I know I've been throwing a lot of different ideas at you, but when you're answering the question of like, what flight do I do, maybe you don't really feel like deciding where to go, there are tools to help you with that, to just kind of let someone take the lead on where to go. For example, there's a website called My Flight Route, which you can go to, and they have basically a flight search where you can put in different parameters. Maybe you don't have that much time, so you just want to do a little quick 30-mile flight. You want to practice some Class B airspace and go into, I don't know, an airport with no tower. And maybe you want to practice an ILS approach or LDA approach, whatever it might be. And then you can hit execute, and it's going to generate a list of various flight options. I guess the one I picked was not a great selection, but you get the idea. If you want to practice in inclement weather, you can use the Storm Chaser feature, and you can filter by airports that currently have IFR conditions to find some ideas of where you can just set the weather to real world conditions and get those IFR flights that you were looking to do in. So that's one nice tool to take away some of the decision-making paralysis. There's also some software built into Microsoft Flight Sim, for example, that you can use. They've got built-in missions, various things, crosswind landings, bush pilot type flights that are quite interesting scenery and could keep you entertained for a while. Evan made me aware of a couple of companies out there that also offer add-ons, which would allow you to get the experience of being I think in this case, this is a contract, like charter pilot type thing, doing air tours, different adventures. This is for Microsoft Flight Sim Sky Park, and this one is for X-Plane, where again they have jobs and missions and different things. Which if you've never had the experience of being a pilot for hire and you want something that's going to keep you motivated and interested in doing these other things that I talked about for proficiency, but with a bit more structure, then these are also great options to consider. So we'll start wrapping things up here with talking about how to work up a sweat in your sim, this is my favorite part because, as a flight instructor, it's always fun to create scenarios that can really push pilots to the next level. And once you're at a certain point and the basics are kind of easy for you, then this is where the simulator has so many possibilities. So, one example that would apply either for a VFR pilot or IFR pilot is perhaps you plan a route with minimum fuel and in poor weather conditions. So something like this is where everything has to be really on point. Thinking about alternate airports, perhaps you have to think about all the different airspace rules and how far from the clouds you have to fly, minimum visibility, all of these things. You can, it might be a bit painful, but create a scenario that's right on the edge of where you could or couldn't do it, and really try to think through all of these different things that usually don't matter, but in these corner cases do matter quite a bit. So this is an area very nicely done in a sim. For again, both IFR and VFR pilots, you might consider practicing your navigation skills without a GPS. So a lot of us are very accustomed to using the GPS, but perhaps we do a flight with, a slant alpha with only VOR work. Or if we're VFR, just using our sectional chart, this is an area where Microsoft Flight Sim would be particularly well suited. So some good options there. If you're doing IFR work, perhaps for holding patterns, you haven't done those in a while and you want to practice the entries, just pick a VOR, pick a number for your inbound course, some turn direction, and that's it. You can just practice these all day. In X-Plane, it's very easy to bring up a map here, and you can just click the airplane and move it around. Maybe if this is the VOR here, the Norwich VOR, we can start on the north on one of them, east, south, west, and you can do them over and over again in a very efficient way. So another good option for you. If you aren't in an area that uses obstacle departure procedures often, or ODPs, maybe you can find a mountainous area, maybe somewhere in Vermont or wherever that has a lot of ODPs, and just pick 4 or 5 airports and fly them one after another. And you'll get lots of exposure to the different ways that those are structured and lots of practice. If you really want to push your workload management skills, maybe that's something instructors have told you, hey, you need to work on kind of your multitasking and organization and workload management. Find some fairly short flights you can do in busy airspace with the online ATC. We'll talk about that more in a second. And finally, on the emergency side, we've talked about this a bit already, but one other thing that's nice in X-Plane is the ability to have completely randomized emergencies that you can set simply by checking this button here. So if you check the button, set mean time between failures, and then you can go ahead and change this. Let's say we put 25 hours as our mean time before failure. So this would give us 10 failures per hour, which might be a bit much. So maybe we want 1 failure per hour, so we put 250. Whatever you might prefer for the level of intensity, you can put that in there, and then you'll be completely surprised by whatever X-Plane throws at you. It might be something small, it might be something important, but that's the fun of it. And you could keep this on for a lot of your flights if appropriate, and you'll get a good workout that way as well. So finally, from there, we'll talk a bit about online ATC and community. So the online ATC world is very large, and I'm not going to be able to highlight all of the different organizations that are out there. I'll talk about the 2 that I have experience with primarily, which are VATSIM and Pilot Edge. So VATSIM is an online network where you can connect your simulator to. And the advantage of doing that is once you're on the network, there are different air traffic controllers that can be online. I've got an example here in Europe, same thing in the US, throughout the world actually. This is an example of a controller that is working this airspace, and you can see all of these are real live people flying their airplane on this network. So you'll see other airplanes around, you'll have a good motivation to continue practicing your visual scanning maneuvers and checking for traffic before you turn, all those good things. And actually talk to these controllers who are trained, whether they be hobbyists or aviation professionals. The service is usually very good, and get services completely free on VATSIM. There's also Pilot Edge, which it does not cover the entire world. It only covers the Western US as it stands right now. The advantage is that there are consistent hours during which you can fly, and you'll be assured that there will be a controller, because VATSIM is, volunteer based. You may not be guaranteed of a controller in your area, but on Pilot Edge, you know for sure Western US will be covered certain hours of the day. But they both work basically the same way. And with Pilot Edge, there's some other good things that are, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed and you'd like some structure with what exactly to practice, they have a lot of things on Pilot Edge that are very useful to be aware of. For example, there's a CAT rating program that, if you're maybe new to VFR flying, will take you through VFR communications procedures. There's a similar thing for instrument rating. And also there are, like I was mentioning with those add-on programs, there's different charter flights you can do, which are quite interesting. Alphabet challenges, which basically have you going to different airports in a given state with a whole bunch of different legs and variety. So all good things that are available on Pilot Edge. One of the other interesting things about these two networks is the presence of these different events, fly-ins, really, just like in real life, where people fly into, let's say, Oshkosh. We have similar things on Pilot Edge and VATSIM. So here's an example that you can put on your calendar for next year during the actual Oshkosh Air Show. If you're not able to make it, perhaps the next best thing is to do SimVenture, which is what Pilot Edge calls it. And this is a screenshot that I found on Twitter from all the aircraft that were flying into Pilot Edge's version of Oshkosh, which is pretty amazing. So you can hear, I believe they use actual air traffic control volunteers from the actual Oshkosh show, and this is something that's quite a cool experience to be part of. Same thing in general, just there's flight sim communities out there where people are going to post that, hey, I'm going flying. It might not be an event, but still you can go fly with someone and maybe ask each other questions as you go along, and just have a more social experience, more of a community-based experience. On VATSIM, this is an incredible example. It's called Cross the Pond, a large group flying between the US and Europe. And there are so many airplanes here. Each one of them is a actual person behind the computer. And there's air traffic controllers that are, providing voice-based instructions to all these aircraft. So lots of options there. And then we'll talk a bit about the service that my company offers, which is the training and support side of things. So like I mentioned, we have right now 10 instructors from around the world, various different aircraft types that you can fly with. And basically, it's as simple as sharing your screen in a Zoom call, like most of you have used before. And at that point, the instructor sees everything they need to provide you instruction like you're in a real aircraft. So that's primarily what we do. Typically, we customize the training to suit the exact needs of whatever you're doing. If you're a student pilot and you're trying to prepare for your lessons, or whatever, maybe you're just looking for proficiency training, whatever the case may be, we're able to customize it. We also have some courses that are pre-packaged coaching plans for the common situations. You can take a look at those. We are working on launching a library of activities soon, which I think will help a lot of you that are looking to implement some of what we've talked about tonight, and have basically a set of things you can do to pick from each week. So that'll be coming online, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. Some of those, we have one activity already actually on the website under the courses, which can give you wings credit if you're familiar with the FAA wings program, which can help you get a flight review, through doing various online activities. So that's one option to look at. And then, as Evan mentioned, if you have any sort of technical issues with your simulator, maybe you need to install some plugins that are giving you trouble, or whatever the case may be. If you're maybe don't have a simulator yet and you want someone to give you advice on what is the best hardware for your situation, then we can also help with that as well. So finally, we'll talk about some specific actions that you can take to try to put some of this in place. So I think one of the biggest things that you can do to create an exciting and immersive and valuable experience in your sim is to bring in the online air traffic control component. And for a lot of people, that's a game changer once you're beyond the basics of how to fly the airplane for getting that next level of value out of your sim. So you'll look at the different networks I mentioned, the VATSIM and Pilot Edge, and see what makes sense for your situation and sign up. And they'll have great instructions on how to get started. And that's a great first step. I would also recommend making some sort of a realistic and enjoyable sim practice schedule. Of course, a lot of us are quite busy, so we can't spend all day, practicing and studying. But something that would work for you, maybe if you're a student pilot, you do 1 half-hour rehearsal before each flight lesson, and maybe a half-hour debrief after each flight lesson. And maybe have your sim kind of up and running as you're going through your book work to do some of these little explorations like I mentioned. So if you're a rated pilot, perhaps you can go through the different sources of activities and flights and just plan out a calendar for your next month of one each week. Perhaps if you'd like to take things to the next level, we can at Flight Sim Coach put together a monthly sim flight review for you where we can remotely give you various failures and things to really push you and tailor it to your specific aircraft and situation. And definitely look into some of these events as well, AirVenture, the VATSIM events, and get those on your calendar as kind of things to look forward to and practice for throughout the year. And that's going to be a great goal for you. And finally, with our coaching services, we do offer free consultations to those who are interested to potentially work with one of our instructors. So you can go on flightsimcoach.com to access that. And as Evan mentioned, the captain level members at Flight Sim Association receive a 1 hour free coaching session as part of their membership. So thank you. If I'd be happy to take any questions with, I have a few minutes remaining. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect, Mike. Thank you so much for the engaging presentation. Well thought through. Love the demos, of course. And I'll just talk a little bit to that online ATC piece. For those who don't know, I control on VATSIM. It's a lot of fun. I just started doing it as a passion, of course, and now it's like something I wish I could do full time if I had the time for it. And just the other day, actually, FSA Captain Michael, I had no idea it was him, did it just flying VFR into Rutland, got into some weather, called me up for a pop-up IFR clearance. We gave him an instrument approach, and it was just a ton of fun. And that's what it's all about for me. The most successful simmers, for me anyway, aren't people who go in and go, okay, I'm going to use this as just a training tool, because then it becomes like work. It shouldn't feel like training. It shouldn't feel like work. It really should feel like fun. And so if you can go out and do stuff that you find engaging and fun, all of a sudden you look down at the clock and it's like, oh wow, I've been here for 2 hours. That's when you know you're doing it right, because that's going to be something that lasts for you, as opposed to, okay, if you're really forcing yourself into it and having to make sure that you get on the sim, you're probably not maybe doing it in the way that is really giving you the enjoyment that you're looking for. So that's my 2 cents on this one. Please send in your questions, everybody. Love to take some questions here in the last couple of minutes. I'll start off with a couple comments from Frank that you can see on the screen there if you're reading the chat or if you're watching on our website. Two things that he wanted to bring up that I think are great points. Number one is FS economy, which I think we talked about before, Mike, if you remember during our rehearsal session, and also virtual airlines as things that can help give that sort of purpose or that gamification a little bit to your sim. Do you want to just talk briefly to those 2 points?
Yeah, absolutely. So the FS economy, I'm not super familiar with. Perhaps Evan, you might be have more background to speak to you on that. Certainly, the virtual airline world is quite interesting, and if you have any interest in structured airline operations, and maybe you've never thought about doing this, but you're an instrument-rated pilot that wants to learn about how to become a professional instrument pilot in the way that a real airline pilot plans flights and understand dispatch releases and all that. These virtual airlines are awesome for that sort of thing, and they'll give you a structure with a roster and a schedule that will provide that same sort of structure that I was mentioning, where you kind of plan out your flights for each month. So certainly I would recommend looking into that if you have any interest in the airline world.
Yep, and FS Economy, as we discovered, should support everything. So FSXP, 3D, X-Plane, and MSFS, kind of like the XCPL pilot thing, or even a little bit like the Skypark. It's all about giving that sort of purpose and that little bit of extra to your flying. So it's sort of creating that little world around everything that you're doing and giving you a reason to go to this particular airport. And actually, we were just on a panel discussion earlier this week with Callum from FS Elite and a few other media personalities, and even Callum, who's been simming since the 2000s, sort of said, like, a few weeks ago, was kind of feeling like burned out. I've been doing all these airliner flights, and then he discovered this thing called the Sky Park, which is again this sort of gamification piece to the simulator, and not something that you might be thinking of if you typically do airliner flights or you tend to be more on the realistic side like I am. But he picked it up and he's like, you know what, it was a really fun change of pace, and it kind of brought him back into the fun of flight simulation. So I think those things, Frank, great points because they're awesome contributions to what you can do with your sim experience. FSA Captain Harris B, also from Canada. Shout out to my fellow Canadians. You're like 45 minutes from me, buddy, by the way. Asking if it's possible to set up X-Plane with real-world weather conditions and have it update in real time.
Yes, so X-Plane does have the capability to inject real world weather conditions. Quite simply, you go to customize weather, and then you have in the lower left weather mode match real world conditions, and then you select a refresh rate for however often you want it to update, and that's it. So yes, it does have that capability.
And then if you find it isn't working the way you want it to, there's also Active Sky, which I can never recommend enough because it's the absolute best weather engine that we had for FSX back in those days. And they have an X-Plane version as well that I think has a few extra features, like you could even set like custom weather, and I think there's a similar kind of storm chaser feature in that one as well. So I love the guys at Active Sky. We need that for MSFS. I hope we'll get there someday. Speaking of weather, keeping on that theme, FSA Captain Frank wants to know if the simulators model density altitude.
Yeah, so density altitude certainly in X-Plane I've explored, and I believe it's well modeled in X-Plane. I have not done an exploration in Microsoft, but it is kind of a basic function of your pressure and temperature. So those two things are built into certainly X-Plane, and I believe Microsoft Flight Sim as well. So that would model density altitude and the effects of that on your true airspeed and ground speed, and in turn all the aircraft performance questions about runway takeoff and landing distances.
Yep, absolutely. And from Will on the FSA website, flying an airliner by yourself isn't something you tend to see a lot in real life. Are there options out there to bring a second simmer into that other seat?
There are. So the software to use to make that happen, I believe one of them is called Smart Copilot. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, Evan, but there are shared cockpit utilities. I believe Smart Copilot is for X-Plane, and there is likely an equivalent for Microsoft. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but those allow you to connect two simulators. And once that's done, you can have one pilot that's perhaps doing all the pilot monitoring duties and another that's doing the pilot flying duties and working together in a real team format. So yes, it is possible, and you'll, I think, find some videos on YouTube if you look where people are simulating these flights. You've got two pilots, and it's quite a realistic experience.
Yep, and there's a few different things also that you can do programmatically. So you can have like a sort of a virtual first officer that will run checklists for you. You can actually use voice commands for, and I of course am now forgetting the name of the one that I was just about to say. So if you know, you can tell me, and if not, I'll try and search it up here real quick. But there's a couple.
Yeah, it's
One of them, yeah, Mirror Check is the one that's sort of more for general aviation. And then I'm just trying to remember the one that does more of the airliner type things. He's big in MSFS, and he's just released a whole bunch of different things. But what is that one called? Oh, it's FS2 Crew. I figured it out. FS, then the number 2, and then the word crew. FS2 Crew would be one to look at for sort of the programmatic version of that second pilot, where you can actually have them, again, running the checklists, calling for certain things at certain times, and be that second set of eyes for you, even though it's not a real human. I think that's probably all we've got for questions. Thanks to the chat. Lots of great contributions from everybody. Thanks as always for watching. Mike, any kind of last thoughts as we wrap up for today? Anything else you want to share with people? And maybe just one more time the website for Flight Sim Coach so they can find you.
Yeah, no, I think that covers everything I was hoping to share. But thank you guys for watching. If you have questions, I'm always happy to answer. You're welcome to email me, mike@flightsimcoach.com. And of course, the website also is flightsimcoach.com. And again, you're welcome to schedule a free consultation with our instructors and captain level members with Flight Sim Association. Feel free to take a look at your benefits and make use of the 1 hour free coaching session. So look forward to hearing from you guys, and thank you for watching today, and safe flying.
Perfect. And I saw one more question come through just in the nick of time. Do you want to answer it?
Oh, sure. Sure, sure.
Perfect. So this is from Scott out in RAL. I don't know where that is. It seems like it would be, I don't know, I'm not even going to guess. Anyway, it says that he's an older pilot, 60-ish, not flown in a long time, thinking about building a home sim. And he's pointing out that way back when he basically used to use an older simulator with almost no visuals. Now we have all this cool stuff, but he's
Mhm.
saying, why is it sort of so difficult to find simulators that are loggable? And actually, I was going to ask you kind of a follow-up question on that as well. Do you think we're ever going to see the day where we can do truly loggable remote flight instructions? So theoretically, you could be in New York and someone else could be in LA. I mean, right now we can do that, but it doesn't necessarily count toward the logbook without a lot of effort.
Sure.
So any comments on that? Because Riverside, California. Thanks, God. I should have known that. But yeah, any thought sort of around that component of just being able to start actually using this stuff for real training? And you'll have
Mhm.
to. I'll let you answer first, and then I'll go on the soapbox because this has been one that's bothered me for many years as well.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the difficulty of finding this, like a certified or capable simulator to be able to log time, in terms of that question, I mean, that comes down to the extra cost and lower demand for that price point with the certified simulators. But for the other question as to whether I think that someday it will be possible to log certain things that can be done in your home flight simulator, perhaps a non-certified simulator, and perhaps something that's with a remote instructor on the other side. I do think that it's possible. That's not something that we've worked towards because really the way that we look at it is, most pilots, they average, if you're going for your private training, let's say it's somewhere between 60 and 70 hours of training. So, and the minimum is 40. So we're not really looking at, people getting their private in under 40 as being the goal. It's more perhaps you can save some money and get it closer to 40. So really the ability to log time from anything that we do in the simulator becomes less important in that case because it's not actually getting you any benefit to count those hours, generally speaking. Certainly for instrument currency, it becomes a different story where that could be quite beneficial to be able to do approaches at home and be able to log some of that. I believe the folks at Redbird have worked, potentially gotten some information from the FAA on that question. I'm not quite sure, but I think there might be some possibilities there, but it's something I don't believe has been answered or it's not provisioned for specifically in the rules yet that I'm aware of. But hopefully I'm hopeful and positive that in the future this will become more of a commonplace thing and there will be provisions for getting credit for a lot of what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's long overdue, and so there are options. I mean, if you want to go out there and buy a certified device, you can do
Mm-hmm.
that. You can use them at home for certain things, but the ability for you to use them, as Mike says, is so limited for the extra price that you're paying for that effective just little thing on it that says this is a certified device. I'm not sure it makes sense right now, but I haven't figured out why we can't get regulators to start appreciating time spent on Pilot Edge, time spent on VATSIM. And I'm not
Right.
saying, someone who's just flown on VATSIM should get their license when they walk into an airplane, but yeah, I use certified devices at the flight school, and they were terrible. I mean, they were just awful to fly. You couldn't do anything in them. They didn't feel like an airplane. You had no air traffic control. It was really just a check the boxes exercise,
Mm-hmm.
get some time in our logbook, and maybe save some money. That was it. It was pointless. Why can't I, using a home device that looks way better and feels way better than what I was using at a flight school, talking to a real air traffic controller on Pilot Edge or VATSIM, why can't that count towards something? And so that's been something
Mm-hmm.
through the show that we've done and through the association and through contacts at Pilot Edge and Redbird and others. We've been pushing for that, and we're hoping to get some traction from the FAA or from regulators anywhere else in the world to go, you need to update these standards that were based in the 1960s, back when the only thing that you had was a full flight simulator. We need
Right.
recognition for what the new technology can do. So there's there's my little rant on that one. And Frank, you're right. Definitely X-Plane, P3D. I don't think MSFS has gotten there yet, but I do think they will. Those all allow you to log time, but the key, and Mike, you can speak to this as a flight instructor as well. The key is that the device, not just the sim, not just X-Plane, but the whole thing there, including the hardware, it's all got to be certified, right?
Yeah, that is my understanding. It's the entire simulator setup,
Yeah,
including the controls. And I think a lot of this comes down to that maybe second or third slide that we went through, which is separating out, what are the things that a simulator is absolutely not suited for,
right,
which are the things I think the FAA is focused on in their certification process, like the feel and
right.
perfect aerodynamics and so forth, versus all the other things where any reasonable simulator does to a standard that's much better than any ground school material
Yeah,
could ever convey in terms of educational effectiveness. So I think we'll get there, but it's yeah, it'll be a bit of a road.
Exactly. So maybe we'll make some progress as we continue to do. We invite the FAA, we invite the NTSB, and anyone who will listen, frankly, to come out to the show and try to explain and help people understand that it's not about the feel. That's never what flight simulation has been good at, and yet it's the only thing that the FAA seems to care about, as opposed to all the procedural knowledge, as Mike says, all the ATC stuff. And yeah, Scott says call Pat in San Diego. Yeah, you're right about that. Exactly. That guy can fly a 737, I think, just as well as any airline pilot can. We had a good time when we were down there. Anyway, Mike, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining us once again today. Folks can find more about you, of course, at flightsimcoach.com. And as we wrap things up today, friendly reminder, Flight Sim Expo just around the corner in June. So don't forget to make those bookings now because, as I said before, those hotel rooms, they're going to fill up quickly. And what will happen once they're full, I don't know. So make sure that you do that. Don't forget you can help support us here on FSA. More of these webinars coming up. We are just $3 a month to join as a Flight Sim Association captain. You get that 1-hour coaching session with Mike. You get 3 free Orbix products, 20% off everything else from Orbix, or at least a bunch of things, and a whole lot more. So we appreciate that. And talking all about VATSIM, when we were on that panel discussion I mentioned earlier in the week, a lot of people said, I'm a little nervous about VATSIM. I'm nervous about Pilot Edge. I don't know what the next steps are. So we've put together a webinar that's going to help with exactly that. It's on October the 15th, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And during that session, we are going to cover everything you need to know in 45 minutes about North America, oceanic procedures, and Europe for flight simmers. Of course, the Cross the Pond event is designed to do that. You start in North America, you fly all the way across the ocean, and for that whole 8 or 10-hour flight, if you're actually participating, you get ATC the whole time. If you don't want to spend 10 hours in front of the computer, I don't blame you. You can fly around North America, you can fly around Europe, and just take advantage of the coverage in those local areas. So that webinar is designed to help you feel more comfortable with all of those things. It's on October the 15th. It's our next live session, and you can register to participate for free, like all of our webinars, at flightsimiassociation.com/webinars. Once again, to the chat, thank you so much for participating and for all the great questions. Pleasure hanging out with you tonight. Thanks again to Mike, and from all of us here at Flight Sim Association, have a wonderful evening.